Hello everyone, my name is Caoimhe Maloney. I'm the Events Manager with Limerick Chamber. I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar, Zoom and Online Etiquette Training with Anya Barry and IBT. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and as always, we hope that these webinars are of support and assistance to you, our members, during this difficult time. Should there be any topics or experiences or difficulties that you're having at the moment, please reach out and we'll do our best to assist you. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Anya Barry of IBT.
Hello everybody, and welcome everybody, and I hope you're all staying safe in these very unprecedented times. I suppose the one thing I'd like to say to you is that this isn't my normal style of delivery. I'm more used to standing in front of a group of people where I get lots of interaction from you. So with that in mind, I know we all have to adapt to this new normal, but I'm going to ask each of you in the chat section there maybe to put in your name, your company name, and maybe one thing that you hope to get from today, if you don't mind. I know it's a very brief window. I'll try to cover whatever I can. I have kind of an agenda set up already myself, but nonetheless, if there is a particular thing that you put down there, I'll try to cover them. And if not, we might see if we can reorganize another session in the future. So I see Calixta after typing in there, which is great. But if we could put in your name, sorry, not your name, your company and one thing that you'd like to get from today, that would be great as I continue through it. As I said, this is very unprecedented times, and there has been a huge growth in the whole line of using online platforms. In actual fact, there has been a 378% increase on user count with Zoom on the same time last year. To the middle of March this year, Zoom has seen a 2.2 million increase in new users, whereas in the whole of 2019, there was 1.9 million new users. So it's growing exponentially. Great to see everybody coming in there. That's brilliant. Lovely. We've got Lorna, Michael, everything, but using Zoom in a professional environment. That's fine. We'll work through that. So let's go. Let's make a start and see. This is what I'm planning on covering. Oh, hang on a second now. This isn't very professional, is it? Oh, there we are now. There we go on to the next slide. These are kind of the objectives that I want to talk about really as we go through it. So the first one is about interacting with others using online platforms. I'm going to talk, you hear me speaking about Zoom all the time. It's the one that I use most frequently, but that's not to say you can't apply the same things with Cisco WebEx, with Microsoft Teams, any of those other alternatives. So even though I use Zoom, just to take it for all of them that are there. Perfect. The second thing then I was going to talk about is a little bit about the online etiquette, both for you as a host and for you as a participant. And I think that's going to sort of meet what you would need there, Olivia, which is great. The session is going to take approximately 30 minutes. Now, as we go through it, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or else type something into the chat box. At the moment, Caoimhe has everybody muted, so it means that there's going to be no interactions or no distractions with noises or notifications popping in. But if you do have anything to say, just type it into chat, or alternatively, if you would like to raise your hand, Caoimhe will unmute you and we can speak then. It's probably better to do that in case you forget what you wanted to say. I will leave a couple of minutes at the end of the session where I'll try to answer any of the questions that are coming through in the chat. But in the meantime, by all means, raise your hand and Caoimhe will unmute you. So that's kind of the format of what we're going to go through. So let's go. So the first thing I want to talk about is things that you can do before the session starts. And the very first one I'm going to talk about is your profile picture. In the last while, while I've been using Zoom, I found that I would say fewer than about 40% of participants have a profile picture set up in Zoom. So instead of that, what we see is just a blank screen with the initial of your first name. So in my case, if I didn't have my profile picture in there, it would just be an A. It's not coming across as being very professional. And actually, you can brand it, you can put your logo in there, you can put your name. It doesn't matter what you put in there, but I would strongly urge everybody here to take the opportunity to put in a profile picture. And where you do that, in the Zoom home screen, at the top right-hand corner, you will see like a little cog or a gear. And if you click on that, it will take you into your profile settings and you can put in your profile picture. The second thing that I would say to you really is that you as an individual, if we are talking about, I'm going to actually come to body language later on if that's okay, but you as an individual, obviously you need to dress as if you were going to your sales meeting. You need to dress as if you were going to be going to a professional meeting. From the waist up now, mind you. Nobody can see below, so don't worry about that. From the waist up. The same thing, you know, your makeup, your jewelry, everything, whatever you would normally wear to look as professional as possible. And I suppose that's really where I'm talking about there. The third thing that I would say to you is that I believe it's really important to have your camera on. As a professional coach, I deal a lot with, do one-to-one coaching sessions, and I literally came off a session this morning where the participant didn't want to have his video on, and I found it absolutely very difficult to gauge how he was interacting with the session. So I think from a point of view of a courtesy point of view and an etiquette point of view, it's vitally important that your video is set to come on. Now, again, in Zoom settings, you can set it so that your video always comes on automatically when you join a session, or you can choose to turn it on. I suppose my advice to you would be to make sure that it comes on automatically when you join the session. And then the last thing that I would say is that if you are holding a team meeting, or if you are even doing a sales call in that, and you're going to be using PowerPoint, have those ready and have gone through them, have transitioned through them to make sure that your transitions are working correctly, the animations are working correctly, and that it's going to look as professional as it would be if you were sitting in front of the person that you're trying to impress. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, this really is about you adapting your style to meet the needs of participants in this new normal way of working. Then I'm going to talk a little bit there about the surroundings. And I suppose the first thing that I'd say to you is that I'm very cognizant that people are working in very strange environments. They're working from kitchen tables, they're working in bedrooms and playrooms. You know, there's children there, there's dogs, there's so many different things that we have to be cognizant of now. So in the first instance, I suppose, in terms of surroundings, it's to try to, when you have that important call to make, or you have that important team meeting to run, it's to try to make sure that you're in the best space possible for having the conversation. I mean, I think we all remember this man on BBC where he had, I think that was his wife actually, I think people thought it was his nanny at the start. The children were running in on the rolly thing, and then the mother was coming in afterwards to try, and it's all so distracting for the people on the other end of the call. I think in this situation we all thought it was quite funny, because maybe we wouldn't have been as used to being on Zoom or online platforms, but now people are spending 4, maybe 5 hours a day on these platforms, so it can get very wearying. And if you're trying to be as professional as possible, the ideal would be to make sure you have the quietest possible space that you can find. In Zoom, there is, if you look at my background here, this is my home, so you know, you can see there's a plain white background there. But in Zoom, you have the capability of using a virtual background, something like this. I would say to you, there are some default virtual backgrounds that are there, and it hides the clutter, you know, of your own home and that. I would say to be very careful with them, because they can look a bit false. Now, you can upload an image yourself that you have of, you know, a place near you, maybe, you know, green fields, and maybe an office environment, whatever you like to upload. But I find sometimes when you move, as you know, and we all move our heads when we're speaking, that it looks a bit disjointed. So maybe try it out, see how you get on with it. Again, you will use this in the settings. Zoom actually have some very good tutorials about how to set up virtual backgrounds and that. So by all means, have a check at those and see what they look like, and see whether you would find them useful or not. The other thing that I would say to you that's really important is lighting. If you look at this gentleman here, this is an example of quite poor lighting. Again, if I'm talking about Zoom, they talk about maybe assessing the light, and that you can download a light meter to assess the light, to identify the best space for you to hold your Zoom call. because the difference is phenomenal. If you look at this gentleman now, it's exactly the same guy, the same room, everything, but the lighting is different. A trick that I've used in the past, in particular at night time, is when I have a white wall behind me, is to turn the desk light so that it's facing the white wall behind me, rather than facing the computer screen. So the light bounces off the white wall and reflects back. So it helps to give a more balanced lighting view, if you like. And I suppose the third thing I'd say to you here is just in terms of desk space. I don't know if you're like me, but I find it very difficult to work in a cluttered desk environment. I like to have my desk as clear as possible. And I suppose there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, it stops distractions, and it ensures that when we are speaking to our participants on Zoom, that we are actually fully engaged and fully focused, and people know if you're distracted or not giving them your full attention. Next thing that I want to just talk very briefly about is about Zoom, WebEx and Microsoft Teams commands. And again, there are a number of commands that I would strongly suggest that you implement immediately. And again, you go to that little cog setting at the top right-hand corner of the screen. The first one is I would ask you to turn your notifications to Do Not Disturb. If you have email notifications popping in or IMs or anything like this, if your audio is on, people will hear ping, ping, ping. And if there are 10 people on the call, this can get really distracting, particularly for the speakers. The other thing that I would say to you, even if you don't have audio turned on, if you see an email popping in, you're looking down to see whether I'll do something with that or whether I won't, and again, it distracts you from your thoughts and your flow. The second one I would strongly suggest is when you're going to Zoom settings is to go on to mute on entering a meeting. And that means then that there is no background noise being picked up. Personally, I like to use headphones. I think that it cuts down on all the background or ambient noise. But muting on entering meeting will also help to give a more professional image of you when you're joining the meeting. And for those gentlemen and ladies out there, there is a Zoom setting called Touch Up My Appearance. Really? And I'm not going to tell you whether I have that turned on in my case or not, but it is there, and it kind of smooths out, any kind of blemishes. It gives the overall appearance that you've got makeup on or whatever the case might be. So maybe it's something that you might like to try. And then just to have a quick talk to you about the difference between Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars, because I see that some people, are first time using Zoom and maybe they don't really know the difference between the two. So Zoom webinars, like what I'm doing here, it's not interactive. I'm basically talking at you, and the only way that I can get feedback from you is basically through the chat session. Whereas Zoom meetings is much more interactive, and I suppose that's really what you would be using more frequently. It allows for you to get feedback. It allows for people to go into breakout rooms. It allows for polls. There's a number of different areas that I'm going to talk a little bit more of in the slide where we talk about interacting with the audience. So I suppose for the majority of people, it's really going to be Zoom meetings that you will be using. But just to let you know that the Zoom webinar is also available if you wanted to present to people, where you wouldn't have the same amount of interaction. So, hope we're doing okay there. And no questions coming in yet on the chat. If you have, please feel free to chat up there, or if anybody has anything to say, feel free to raise your hand and Caoimhe will let you know. And also just to say that we're recording this session at the moment, and it will be available afterwards for anybody who would like to get it. Okay, so let's move on then, and we'll go on to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about interaction during the call. So in the first stage, I suppose it's really important that, okay, if I'm talking about influencing, there are two different styles of influencing. You've what's called push and you've got what's called pull. So in the pull method, you're asking people questions to try and get as much information from them, and the influencing research will show that people are more likely to commit to something if they are offering it themselves rather than being told what to do. So I suppose what I would say to you really is that in this call, in these things, it's important to ask as many questions as possible to identify whether or not people are understanding what you're talking about, whether they are committing to actions, what those actions are going to be. And there are different types of question marks. There are different types of questions in there, I suppose. You've got closed questions and open questions. And I would say to you to try and use as many open questions as possible. The what, why, when, where, and how. Now, we've got a couple of questions coming through here on the board, so I'm just going to answer those before I forget them. So Michael has asked, do we get the slides afterwards on email? Well, I've certainly shared those with Caoimhe in Limerick Chamber, so I'm sure she will send those out to you if you wish to get those. And Olivia has said, when doing a webinar that's over an hour, would you give people a break, just 5 minutes comfort break? Absolutely, Caoimhe. I personally, I suppose that the longest webinar I'm finding is that people will hold attention for about 45 minutes. So if it's any longer than that, you definitely need to give them a break. And you definitely want to give them at least 5 minutes. I even find when I'm doing Zoom meetings, I give people a break after an hour, and they need it even just to go and get a cup of coffee for themselves. So that would be my tip to you there. In terms of body language, I suppose when you talk about body language, and I ask people what are examples of positive body language, most people will talk about the smile and they will talk about the eye contact. Now, one of the tips that I have in terms of maintaining eye contact in a Zoom meeting or a Zoom webinar is to ensure that your camera is at eye level. And if I have my laptop here now currently on a box which is about, I don't know, 6 inches high maybe, because if I didn't, I'd be looking down like this as I was speaking, and you'd lose that eye contact, you'd lose that connection that you want to have with people. So I suppose, again, from a professional point of view, I would say it's really important to try and raise your camera up when you are having those conversations. Secondly, just in terms of voice, we've all been in situations, I'm sure, where we've heard people speak in a very monotonous voice, and it gets so boring. So I think it's really important to try and inject a bit of enthusiasm or a bit of energy into the call. So to adjust your modulation on your voice, to adjust the pitch, and also to adjust the speed, so that sometimes when you've got something really exciting to say, you can speed up and that gets people involved. And other times when you're being a bit more reflective, that you slow down your pace of voice. So that it's almost as if you're thinking about something. And this keys into the learning styles that different people have. You have some people who are theorists, you have who need to know the theory behind something. You have people who are activists who want to get involved, who physically want to be doing something. You've got the reflectors who need to think about things before they can respond. And then you have the pragmatists who want to know, well, how can I apply this, in real life? Give me an example where I can use this practically. Give me the practical hints and tips that we need to know. So there are some things that you need to be looking at. But again, I would say to you, particularly in a call, in a large call, try and use questions. One of the things that I tend to do as well, if I have a lot of people on a call, I will divide people into virtual tables. And by that, all I would say is that I will have Mary and Anya on table number 1. I will have Niamh and Emer on table 2. I will have David and Jack on table 3, for example. And then when I'm having the conversation and I want to get some feedback from the group, I might say, okay, can I ask table 3 there for your input? So David or Jack, maybe you might give me your understanding of that there. And then I might say, and I haven't heard from table 1 for a while, so Mary or Ron, would one of you like to come in here and give me your views? And that way I can keep a track as to make sure that I'm getting feedback from everybody who's in the group. So I think that's another thing that you can potentially do. The whole purpose behind this really is you want to build trust. And if you look at the trust equation says that people trust you when you are credible, you are reliable, there is intimacy over self-orientation. So what does that all mean? Credibility is about the words that you use. So it is how knowledgeable do you sound, how prepared are you, what sort of language you use. So if it's, the jargon that's required, that's the kind of thing that you'll be looking for. The second one then is reliability, and these are the actions. So if you say you're going to do something, do you commit to it? Do you follow through? The third one then is intimacy, and intimacy really is the one thing that we miss out in this virtual space, because obviously I can't see you, so in terms of building the relationship is quite difficult. And that's another reason why I believe the call is having the camera on is so important. And then self-orientation is whether you are more focused on helping me or whether you're more focused on helping yourselves. So I think in terms of using Zoom, you need to be very prepared. You need to be, if actions appear, you need to make sure that you commit to them. And in terms of intimacy, this is about the emotion. So credibility is about the words, reliability about the action, and intimacy about the emotion. So how can you make that connection with people? And that's why it's so important to try and have the feedback brought into it by asking for questions on that. Olivia, you were also asking the question, can the presenter go in and out of virtual rooms? Yes, the presenter can in breakout rooms, and I'm going to get to that in just one quick second. Okay, other things in terms of encouraging interaction with the call. I'm working with an organization and they have team meetings, and I think they have them every week, but they rotate. At the start of every meeting, there is a song or a video clip that one of the team members play. So the last day that I was in there, they had Queen, We Will Rock You, and they were all clapping their hands along, and it was the team members have said they really look forward to seeing what song the next session starts with. So it's a way to make it slightly different from the norm. Another thing you can do is maybe to have an intro video done. So this might only be, and I would suggest no more than 4 or 5 minutes. If you were maybe doing a sales call or something like that, you can do a video that you can then send off to people. And again, it's to try and get people more comfortable with the whole virtual reality space. And the last one then is about using PowerPoint. And I use this a lot when I'm facilitating a session, or even if I was coaching somebody, I would have a blank PowerPoint session, a PowerPoint slide open at the back. And as we were going through it, I will type into it so that the other person can see what I'm typing there, so that they can both agree to it as we're going through it. And then I can email the slides to them then afterwards. If I'm looking at Zoom features itself, Olivia has spoken very quickly about the breakout rooms. This is a fantastic feature, particularly if you're running any sort of training or facilitation sessions. And I will always use breakout rooms if I have more than about 6 participants. You can assign people manually, or you can assign people automatically. The computer will automatically assign them for you. You can choose yourself. There's a whiteboard feature in there, which is fantastic for capturing points, for drawing. I know a lot of the engineers do it. If you're using Zoom at home, it's a great thing for the use of Pictionary, for example. Polls are another feature that Zoom have, where you can actually ask people questions, and you give them a multiple choice answer. So you'll find out that, like, what's your favorite color, for example. 50% of the people here are saying that purple is their favorite color. Okay, that's not a great example, but you see what I'm trying to do here. So polls are really useful. Obviously the chat again, so that I can see what questions are coming in, so that I can make sure that I answer them. There's also reactions, where you can give a thumbs up, see whether somebody understands what's been said or not, or they might even give a little clap at the end if they fully agree with what you're saying. And then, of course, you've got the facility to record the session, which is very useful if, for example, you are doing an employee's performance review, for example, and you can send it to them afterwards, so that you will share it with them. So there's a whole pile of features there in Zoom that you could potentially use. And as I say, Zoom has excellent tutorials available online for any one of those. So now you know what's available there. You could go in and you could just do Zoom tutorial on breakout rooms, and it will take you through it, Zoom tutorial on whiteboard use, etc. All of that. So if I'm looking at the etiquette, I suppose there are a number of key things that I would say. Mute yourself when you're not speaking. I think that's really important, because it can be so distracting to everybody else on the call. I've heard dogs barking, I've heard babies crying, I've heard knocks on the door, and then somebody says, "Oh, there's the postman for me." So all of those kind of things can be very distracting so mute yourself when you're not speaking. try to minimize interruptions as much as possible. And that's why I'm saying, if you have your do not disturb sign on the notifications in the settings, that will help that. Personally, I find that wearing headphones is better than not having the headphones, because it prevents microphone feedback. Don't talk over each other. As a host, I can mute particular participants and I can unmute them as and when I want to. But as the host, I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that people feel that they can get involved, and that's why I like the use of the virtual tables. Obviously, I would say to you, I believe it's vitally important that the video is on so that you can get that interaction, so you can get that feedback. And as the host, you have the ability, as I say, to mute others, to stop people from sharing screens, or to remove them from calls. So they're all things that you can potentially do as a host. In terms of the etiquette, I've spoken about the audio, I've spoken about the video. I think it's really important that it's on. I think you do need to do a little bit of, rehearsal, if you like, particularly if you're a person who's prone to fidgeting. Because like if I have, my earrings, and if I'm twiddling my earrings, or if I'm constantly at my hair, that can also be really, really distracting for a participant as well. So it's really important that you don't do that. And I suppose the third thing that I would say to you is about focus. You are here on the call for the duration of the call. So it's so important to be fully focused. Again, I've had conversations with people, and I can hear them typing in the background. So they're not fully engaged. And, I suppose as a coach, it's up to me to call that out. So you may not be aware, you might feel, there's an email coming in, or I'll be able to reply to that, it'll be done in 2 minutes. But other people can hear you typing. So again, that's not bringing you across as being very professional. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you want to be as professional as possible, you need to try and minimize all of these things. Now, I think, just on a quick check there, we're almost coming up to 3 o'clock. So it's been a very, very quick run through. I suppose if anybody has any particular questions there before we finish up, please feel free to type them into chat there, or if you want to unmute people, Caoimhe, there, I'll just see if anybody has any questions for me before we finish up. And if not, I would just like to say thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. And if there's any other thing you need to know on Zoom, I'll say Caoimhe and I can see whether there's a need for another one of these things. Thank you very much.